All right, so we'll just go over the agenda. So we'll pray, and then these are the slides for this lesson on euthanasia and medical ethics. And remember that the homework, current events in euthanasia, if we look at this, it's due today. So it looks like maybe like a third of you have finished it. But basically, if you open up this document, let me put that away. There's a list of, well, this is types of news articles. And then this is a list of current news articles on the topic of euthanasia. So you can pick from this list, or if you want to find, if you've read different ones or you want to find a different one, you can. But the idea is to read one pro euthanasia article and then one that's against euthanasia, and just to jot down notes analyzing the two articles. And then there is another article here from the Atlantic called "The Last Children of Down Syndrome," and I will warn you, it is a bit long, but to read this and then just summarize it. So, and this is our last homework assignment for the semester. So that's what the homework is about. And then, what am I doing here? In terms of your final, down at the very bottom, we're still finishing up the finishing touches on it. But once we get it done, it'll be down here in this folder. I have it masked so that you can't see it right now, but it's going to be a seminar, and we're going to look at the encyclical Humanae Vitae, and you'll get it ahead of time, and then in class on the day of the final, you'll have your seminar questions, which will turn in, and then we'll do the seminar discussion on the day of the final, and it's going to be counted just as a regular test. If you look at the syllabus says the final will be 15% of the grade, but given the circumstance, we thought it would be better just to make it the same as any other test that we've actually, I think, only had 2 tests this semester so far. So that's what the final is going to look like. So hopefully that puts your minds at ease so you can maybe focus on other classes. So your final will be the seminar prep, and then we'll do the seminar in class. That day of the final will be like our last class, and so we can have a discussion on Humanae Vitae, one of the most controversial documents the church has ever published. So that's what's going on for the final. So there's no need to worry about the final for this class. Okay, so if you want the slides for today's lesson, you could get them on the agenda. So today we're talking about another sensitive topic, mainly focusing on the issue of euthanasia. But the principles that we use to analyze the issue of euthanasia, many of them also apply to medical ethics in general. So let me go ahead and I'm going to put this away for now. Present. Okay, so the learning objectives for this, come here, you little thing. For this lesson, we'll define physician-assisted suicide, direct and indirect euthanasia. We'll describe the connection between eugenics and euthanasia. We'll explain the evidence from the Netherlands that shows the legal euthanasia, that's spelled wrong, it's weird, is a slippery slope. We'll define the 2 key principles of Catholic medical ethics, and we'll apply the principles of medical ethics to specific case studies. So if we have time, I I looked up some different case studies that we could analyze. So for prayer today, I have a video that reflects on one particular patient's history with the question of euthanasia. So we'll watch that. But if you have any special intentions today, you could put them in the chat. And we'll begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, as we gather today to study the topic of euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide, we call to mind all the people who are suffering in the hospital right now, especially those with COVID-19. We ask you to guide the nurses and the doctors and the scientists who are working towards healing patients and developing a vaccine. And we pray for all those who have died, that you'll welcome them into your kingdom and that your Holy Spirit will comfort their family members. Are there any other special intentions? Kendall's stepmom? Anybody else? Alex's uncle? Okay, for these intentions and all the intentions we hold in the silence of our hearts, we pray the Lord. Lord, hear our prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And here's our video for reflection.
I couldn't believe death was at my door. And I thought, surely that can't be right. Death? He's saying 6 months to a year to live? It was life and death. I just knew I didn't want to suffer. One day I was bleeding so bad that they had to take me by ambulance to the hospital. The doctor came in and said, "Jeanette, you have colon cancer." And it didn't hit me. I just went, I have to go. I have to take care of my mother. I have to do my work. I have to go. And they said, "You don't understand. You have cancer."
When I first met Miss Hall, she had been evaluated by her surgeon. Her surgeon had determined that the cancer was inoperable, meaning that it could not be cured with surgery. So he referred her to me for radiation and also chemotherapy. She immediately told me, she said, "I'm not here for the treatment, Dr. Stevens, I'm here for the pills. 2 years ago, I voted for Oregon's assisted suicide law, and that's what I want. I'm here for the pills. I don't want radiation, I don't want chemotherapy."
I reached that point without hope. I was sinking into depression.
I said, "Miss Hall, would you come back and see me next week? Let's talk about this some more." I was able to get better acquainted with her, and I learned that she had a son who was attending the police academy. He was in his late 20s. And I said, "Miss Hall, wouldn't you like to see him graduate?" He was single. I said, "Wouldn't you like to see him get married? Does he know what you're considering here?"
It made me realize there was hope. There was something to live for. And I thank him for that one sentence that brought me back to reality and made me try.
So she did accept the treatment. She received chemotherapy and radiation. She lost her hair temporarily, but the tumor just melted away.
Dr. Stevens, if you had believed in physician-assisted suicide, I wouldn't be here. You didn't give up on me. You didn't abandon me, and that's why I'm still here. These are the kind of doctors we need that give you hope when your hope is gone. Here I am 15 years later, and I went to my son's graduation. It's great to be alive.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, all right.
I couldn't believe death was at.
So let me do this for a sec. I realize most of you haven't gotten the chance to do the homework assignment yet, but is there anyone who did the homework and turned it in already who would like to share what they learned from the articles they read? Anybody? I know there's like, I think about 5 or 6 of you. No. Okay. Let me go back to my screen sharing thing then. Well, so to begin with,
I couldn't
no,
believe
the
death was
lady.
at my door.
To begin with, we should define our terms. So we have physician-assisted suicide, active or direct euthanasia, and passive or indirect euthanasia. So physician-assisted suicide is when a doctor provides the means for a person to end their life. Specifically, this means the physician provides a prescription or other means for a person to commit suicide. The patient, not the doctor, actually performs the lethal act. And in California, we passed a bill called SB 128 a few years ago that allows for physician-assisted suicide. And the way it works in California, as it was, our law was actually patterned after the law in Oregon, and the doctor would prescribe a lethal medication to the patient, and then the patient would take it. And the way the law works in California, you can actually have it just sent in the mail to you. And there's the problem is there are not very many safeguards. Since the doctor doesn't actually administer the medicine, he just gives you the prescription. You know, that creates a really kind of a scary situation because there's no medical supervision. But in any case, active or direct euthanasia is action taken for the purpose of causing or hastening death. These measures may include a lethal injection or an overdose committed by a physician or another person. So notice the big difference here is the physician is taking an active step to end the life of another person. Passive or indirect euthanasia is action withheld for the purpose of causing or hastening death. And again, notice the intent is to cause or hasten death. These measures include withholding or withdrawal of non-heroic measures, including food, hydration, water, and oxygenation. So notice that in all 3 of these cases, the action taken has the intent of prematurely ending someone else's life, either indirectly, directly, or by assisting that person to do so. So that's the key thing you have to remember when we're looking at these examples, because remember the most fundamental principle of morality is do good and avoid evil. And then from the natural law, we have the secondary principles, one of which is that life has value. And therefore, in Catholic morality, we have the principle that we protect and promote life from conception to natural death. So all of these 3 actions would violate that principle, which is why the Catholic Church opposes these types of actions. Again, it's the Catholic ethics is based on application of principles. So these aren't, the Catholic Church isn't arbitrarily deciding these things. We have principles that are established by human reason, and we use those to understand which actions are moral and which actions aren't. So one of the problems within the euthanasia discussion is the problem of eugenics. You guys, can anybody either in the chat, do you guys know what eugenics is? Have you studied this in history class at all? Anybody? Okay, so Kate says she's heard the term, but she's not sure what it is. Anybody else? Or we could take a guess.
Does it have to do with like the human race and breeding, and they wouldn't let women like get pregnant?
Yeah, it has to do with purifying, using selective reproduction to selectively choose stronger people to reproduce. So it's basically, in this whole idea comes out of a Darwinian worldview. And if we look at human beings like we're just any other animal, and if natural selection, because of a human ingenuity, natural selection hasn't been, and because of morality, we don't select sometimes the strongest people to survive. So eugenics came about as a way to create a better stock of human beings. Now, the problem with that is it doesn't see all human beings as having equal value. So, for example, the Nazis used eugenics because they wanted to create the perfect Aryan race, which was one of the reasons why they wanted to eliminate people that they didn't think were worthy of life. So they would use eugenics to try to create the perfect Aryan person. Margaret Sanger was a proponent of eugenics, and one of the reasons she founded Planned Parenthood was because she thought poor people were a drain on society. So she wanted poor people to have access to contraception and abortion so we could eliminate their children from the gene pool so that it would make a stronger America. A lot of people don't realize that that's part of Planned Parenthood's founding and its legacy. But it was founded on eugenics principles. So there is a strong connection between this idea of eugenics, that we should eliminate unworthy people from the genetic gene pool, and euthanasia. And what we've seen in the article you're going to read for homework if you haven't, oh, right, Elizabeth put here, choose genes you want Hitler wanted to do during World War II to purify the human race. Good, thank you. But yeah, so there is a very strong connection between euthanasia and eugenics. And the connection, again, goes back to that idea of, remember we talked about the culture of life and the culture of death. If we are going to have laws in our country that are going to promote a culture of death, then there's going to be natural consequences to that. And we have to ask ourselves, is that a path we want to go down? And so I have this article from CBS News about what Iceland is doing, how they're using euthanasia and in Iceland to try to eliminate Down syndrome. And so let's take a listen to this news story, and then maybe we could discuss it.
In Iceland, Down syndrome is on the verge of being eradicated, and it's due in large part to the widespread use of genetic testing. But those screenings are raising some serious ethical questions. And that's because since the test began in the early 2000s, 100% of pregnant women whose prenatal screenings have come back positive for Down syndrome have decided to end their pregnancies. Researchers are also seeing similar trends across Europe as well. And while some soon-to-be parents see the decision as a way to prevent suffering, others argue that it's enabling a society where people can just pick and choose which children to bring into the world.
We have basically eradicated almost Down syndrome from our society. That is hardly ever a child born with Down syndrome.
En þau sjáu bara Down syndrome, ekki mig sjálf.
Iceland is a country of about 350,000 people.
It's a unique country because it's pretty much cut off to the world.
When you look at the landscape, it is breathtaking. And when you talk to people in Iceland, they will tell you it feels very much like the country is a giant small town.
Iceland only has one really main hospital, and it's in Reykjavik. It's called Landspítali University Hospital, and it's where every baby is born. It's also where every baby is terminated.
About 80 to 85% of women want to have a Down syndrome screening.
The screening that's been called into question is called the combined test, and they take into account a mother's age, her previous health, and also as well an ultrasound.
Here at the hospital we try to do as sort of neutral counseling as possible, but some people would say just offering the test is pointing you towards a certain direction. But on the other hand, women would come back to us if we hadn't offered it, and then they give birth to a baby with a problem, and they say, why wasn't I offered this test?
And what happens in this room?
Here we have the termination of pregnancy. Here is where the abortion happens.
Helga, our counselor at the hospital, really showed the human impact of when someone goes through a termination of a pregnancy.
We allow them to, if they want to, then they can see the little one.
So after the abortion, you'll sometimes bring the fetus to her?
Yeah, so they can look at it and say goodbye and kiss it goodbye.
And so this is the imprint of
the little
a
one.
Fetus that was terminated.
Yeah. And this is how much she weighed, 56 grams.
She explained this was one of the things that had been part of a family's grieving process. That was a prayer card. It was something that I wasn't sure what she was going to be pulling out, and the next thing I know, I see these footprints.
Footprints smaller than fingernail. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. It was their way of having something left over from that moment.
If they want to, they can have a priest who can help them with a little ceremony saying goodbye. They're grieving, even though they took this decision.
In Iceland, it's genuinely accepted that a woman has the ability to have an abortion.
Kirkjan hefur ekki verið með neina hreyfingu varðandi fóstureyðingar, hvorki gegn þeim né með þeim. En það kann að vera að það sé til örlítill hópur í Íslandi sem að berjast gegn fóstureyðingu. En það mjög lítill hópur og mjög ósýnilegur hópur líka.
Agnes Sigurdardóttir is the first female head bishop of the Church of Iceland. She was a mother herself, and so she said because she has personal experience with having a baby, as she put it, grow inside her, she was able to kind of relate to mothers who might be going through that decision.
Því það náttúrulega það erfiðasta sennilega sem nokkur manneskja getur gert, það að þurfa að taka þessa ákvörðun hvort eigi að eyða fóstrinu eða ekki, og án samviskubits eða sektarkenndar yfir því sem hún ákvað.
You know, there's not many places in the U.S. where the leader of a religion will come out and actually say that they support a woman's right to choose.
Thordis, she's very much about supporting a woman's right to choose, but what she thinks the government is doing is giving women an incomplete picture about what it means to have Down syndrome.
What I'm criticizing is that the government is making this a policy. It's a policy about directing to women not to have this pregnancy. From a health official, for me it's a strong indirect message what to do. And I think that's the major factor for this horrible statistic in this country.
She really is leading the movement against these screenings for this entire country.
Thordis doesn't differentiate between Down syndrome and any other host of issues that people could have throughout their lives, alcoholism or propensity to commit crimes. She places Down syndrome on that same spectrum, saying that you never really know what could become of your child.
There is a spectrum when it comes to people who have Down syndrome.
What you see in the media, you know, the little cute one, and they are so cute, but then a little bit further then they say, yeah, 18-year-old boy with Down syndrome plus other problems is not maybe a good thing.
They are very different. Her brother is not like this. He has autism.
These are the things that do factor into a parent's decision whether or not to continue a pregnancy.
We never wanted to paint a picture that any decision that's been made, whether or not to keep a child with Down syndrome or to terminate a fetus with Down syndrome,
all life on Earth is rooted in DNA. You are messing with the flow of the most precious information on Earth.
Dr. Kari Stephenson was fascinating to me. His feeling was very much that we will have the ability to screen out more than just this one chromosomal abnormality.
If Iceland stands right now nearly at 100% with a screening process that is not as accurate as what the United States has and what other European countries are adopting, then you can only imagine as the technology improves where this termination rate is going to stay.
I'm concerned that we have been a bit heavy-handed in our genetic counseling, because when you run into people who have children with Down syndrome, they love them dearly, and it is a complicated landscape. And I'm not going to fault women for aborting fetuses with Down syndrome.
It really is science versus nature. Do we want to eradicate, all these illnesses, all these abnormalities, all these disabilities from our society? Or what do these disabilities, what do these individuals, what do these people bring for the world we live in?
And I don't think that there is anything wrong with trying to prevent disease. I don't think that there is anything wrong with aspiring to have healthy children. But how far we should go in seeking those goals is fairly complicated decisions.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Let me stop this share for a sec. So, anybody have a reaction? What are your thoughts on what they're doing in Iceland? Anybody? Oh, Mimi, go ahead.
Well, I just don't think that they should be eliminating that kind of gene, because although they have like Down syndrome and that is seen as a disability and seems like, oh, they might have a hard time in this life, they still have the same worth as any other human being. Like they're still functioning human beings. So I just find that to be like a way to strip away humanity and strip away their worth.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's the principle that forms the bedrock of the church's approach, is that all human beings have value because you exist, and that all human beings have equal value. So able-bodied people do not have the right to deprive a disabled person of their life. And another thing that's important to remember with what they're doing is the way Down syndrome is not a genetic disease that gets passed from like parent to child. It's a chromosomal abnormality. And just by eliminating Down syndrome people from their population, it won't stop people from having Down syndrome babies. It's not like a genetic disease that's passed through your genes, like something like cystic fibrosis. So they've created a world in which, in Iceland, 100% of children with Down syndrome are killed, but that's not going to stop the next generation of children with Down syndrome from being born. And that's another important aspect that I don't know if people realize when they watch the show, but I showed this back when I was at St. Anthony, and one of my students, I hadn't even thought about it, and he pointed it out. He's like, you know what, this is really problematic, not just because it's ableism, where we value the able-bodied over against the lives of the disabled, but it's also scientifically just, it's not like they're going to stop Down syndrome. It's still going to happen. So I remember that kid, Evan Vance, he pointed that out, and I was like, yeah, I didn't even think of it that way. Any other thoughts or reactions?
I agree, and I liked the part where she said something about how instead of thinking about the hardships, think about what they can bring to society, because I feel like people with Down syndrome help people able, we are more empathetic, and we see their side and help them. Like I volunteered at an all abilities camp in the summer of 2019, and it really opened my eyes to what they experience in their everyday life, and they really made me so much happier, and they're just really wonderful people. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Isabel, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just think it's like a really tricky situation for some people, because I used to babysit a little girl who has Down syndrome, and it was hard because it wasn't like a genetic thing, because she has an older brother and a younger brother that are like, I guess, normal. I guess you can use that word loosely. But it is true though, because for a lot of people that have Down syndrome, it's hard for them to become independent. So they would have to be with their parents like their entire life. Because I saw a video of a woman explaining how she wouldn't want to encourage her daughter that has Down syndrome to like have children, because that's just a lot of responsibility that people with Down syndrome just can't handle. And it's just hard because they can become independent, but they will be reliant on some sort of support for their whole life. So I think people don't like, they just think it's going to be hard and they don't really consider it, because it's I guess it is difficult, but it's still doable.
Yeah, that's an important point. I had a coworker at an old school, and she had a daughter who had high functioning Down syndrome, but one of their biggest worries was they're going to die, and they who was going to take care of their daughter? And they had set up a trust, and she could work, but one of the difficult decisions my coworker had to make was you brought this up, was she had her daughter sterilized just because she was afraid that if her daughter did get pregnant, it would become this situation that she couldn't handle. So we can definitely be compassionate to parents of children with disabilities. It is hard. It for sure. Carmen, you have your hand up?
Yes, adding on what Tristan said, so my uncle actually had Down syndrome, and so his funeral a few years ago, like everyone came. It was actually more of a celebration. It was just really cool to see, like, people with Down syndrome really do have effect on society. Like, I remember he used to use the radio to like go to where the fire department was, because he wanted to like be there to help and stuff. So some of the people from the fire department actually decided to come to the funeral.
Oh, neat.
And then just, like, they really do affect on society, and it's unfair that they don't get to, that they're like,
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, if we do believe that all human beings are equal and everyone has equal rights, then the disabled should have an equal right to life as anybody else. It's so funny when you talk about going to the fire. Growing up, my family didn't have a lot of money, and my dad had a police scanner, and so he would listen on the scanner for fires. And this is terrible, but my dad would take us to watch people's houses burn down as a form of entertainment. I know that's really weird, but my family's kind of weird. Was there anything else anyone wanted to say before we go to the next slide? We're seeing the connection between eugenics and euthanasia, because to terminate these children is a form of euthanasia, to intentionally take their lives to alleviate possible suffering due to disability. So that's one of the concerns when we have laws that allow for this. It can become a slippery slope. So that's what my next slide is about.
In Iceland, Down syndrome is on the verge of...
Another thing to consider now, when we say slippery slope, that's one of the logical fallacies, right? So typically we would say, if someone was making an argument that, well, we shouldn't have euthanasia because then they might start, who knows when they'll want to eliminate, like people. I have a couple of chronic illnesses. I mean, what if they decide that they don't want to spend the money on treating my illness and they say, you should just commit suicide? And so many people would say, well, that's a slippery slope argument. That's not really a logical argument against euthanasia. The problem is with this particular issue, they have had euthanasia legalized in Europe for many years. And we have seen exactly what everyone worried about happen in Europe. And so this is an older ad. It's from 2012. And it was running in Canada when they were considering passing euthanasia, which I think they have at this point. But the statistics in here show you some of the dangers of euthanasia and assisted suicide. So I just wanted to take a look at this.
In the news today, legislators debated another bill on assisted suicide.
Who is it? Give it to Dad. Okay, so as you saw in that video, when people, and this is what your homework assignment was about, when people argue for euthanasia, remember, well, let's go back a little bit more basic. Remember, St. Thomas Aquinas says that we're ordered to do the good, but sometimes because of the fall, we perceive things that are as goods that truly aren't. So in the case of euthanasia, the goal is a good. People don't want to suffer, right? People don't want to be in pain. However, the means to the end of eliminating pain is the wrong means. It's intentionally taking someone else's life. When you look at most of the studies of people who are interested in physician-assisted suicide, the main thing they're concerned about is pain. And one of the things that we can manage pain very well. So when you give people counseling, people who are considering assisted suicide, and you find out what are you really afraid of, and typically it's pain, and you have them understand that we can alleviate your pain, then most of them will no longer choose it. And that was why I showed you that video in the beginning. The one problem with euthanasia is the way to help people who are in pain is not to kill them, it's to cure their pain. And another thing is, from the Catholic perspective, suffering is something that we all encounter. And our whole religion, I mean, look at Jesus Christ, how he suffered and died on the cross. For us, suffering has value and has redemption. And we can alleviate people's pain, but the God's honest truth is we're not going to ever alleviate that suffering. What we ought to do when we have people who are sick and who are dying is to be with them, to comfort them and help them pass from this mode of existence into the next, not just kill them. So that's some of the kind of philosophical and practical issues. And then in the film, they also highlighted the idea that the argument for having physician-assisted suicide is usually, they'll say, well, it's only going to be for terminally ill patients. It's only going to be for someone who has 6 months to live or less. And they say that it's going to have these safeguards. But what we've seen happen in Europe is that simply isn't true. Once you create the culture of death where we euthanize sick people and old people, it expands to other people like disabled people. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, remember that poster from World War II that said, first they came for the communists, then they came for the Jews, then they came for me? That's the kind of situation we're getting ourselves into. Now, this is the map. This is the Charlotte Lozer Institute. It's a pro-life organization, and this is the most up-to-date information on assisted suicide in the United States. So you can see the states in red have passed assisted suicide. The states in green have laws against it. The states in blue had pre-97 bans. In Montana, apparently it was a court decision that allowed it in practice. And then you have 2 states that just don't have any clear statute or common law. So in California, it is physician-assisted suicide is legal. Now, when we look at a case study, for example, the Netherlands, in 2002, physician-assisted suicide was made legal. And so in 2003, they had 1,626 people euthanized. Then in 2010, you can see a big jump. 4,500 people were euthanized, and you consider how small a country the Netherlands is. And then in 2014, 6,019 people were euthanized. So if you put this on a curve, it would be a slope that's going up to the amount of people who are dying. And the 2014 statistic, 4% of all deaths happened because of euthanasia. That's a staggering statistic. And this is a link to a news story. This was all over the news just a couple months ago. The Dutch government is now backing euthanasia for children from 1 to 12. And again, the idea of not wanting people to suffer, that's a good aim, but we have to always ask ourselves, are there alternatives? I mean, can we alleviate people's pain without killing them? And in that video I showed, they had 550 cases of people being euthanized by doctors against their will without any permission. And it puts the vulnerable in a very precarious position. So for example, with the children under 12, this would be children with illnesses. What if a parent just decides they don't want to take care of their kid anymore and they have their child euthanized? Or, with the case in California, one of my concerns would be, you can have your doctor prescribe you the pills to kill you, and you don't even have to pick them up at the pharmacy. You could have them sent to your house. And what if I decide, I want to take my husband with me and I kill my husband along with myself? There's no safeguards. And another thing that we're seeing, this is so far pretty rare, but one of the problems is if we're going to create a culture in which rather than caring for the sick, we kill them, that's not going to incentivize drug companies to come up with more palliative care. That's not going to incentivize hospitals to, pay for people to have life-saving surgeries rather than, giving them just a death pill. And there is a famous case in Oregon. It's an isolated case so far, but where a woman wanted a cancer treatment, and she petitioned the health insurance company for this cancer treatment, and the health insurance company sent her a denial letter, but they did mention, we will give you the pills to kill yourself, but we're not going to pay for your cancer treatment. And so this is what one of the concerns that's kind of more of a practical concern. And we have to ask ourselves as Americans, is this the path we want to go down? Because again, when we choose a position, that position has logical consequences, and we have to think all the way down the chain. Because if we don't, you're going to end up with things happening that you really didn't want to happen to begin with. So the issue of euthanasia, it puts the vulnerable at risk and the disabled, also the poor. I mean, what if you have a situation where, say, my mom, I have to take her to the doctor all the time. She doesn't have any money. And, what if I put pressure on her? Oh, just mom, take the death pills. It'll be easier. And it puts the elderly in a really precarious position, because they could have, family members that, just are sick of them and want to get rid of them and pressuring them into killing themselves. Again, we should be promoting a culture of life, not a culture that the answer to all of our problems is just to kill people. It's just, that's the kind of world we're looking at. And I don't know, I don't want my kids to be in a world like that. Now, that being said, we always have to look at the other side, which is, people who are seeking euthanasia are seeking it because they're probably scared. They might be afraid of the pain. But again, like I said, studies show that when you actually look at the people who are seeking euthanasia, like the woman in the video from the beginning, she was scared, and she didn't have all the information. But when you give people all the information and give them other options, most of the time, I think it's like 89% of the time, they won't choose euthanasia. So yeah. So what time is it? We get out at 12:40, right? So these are some principles of Catholic medical ethics. Beneficence is the idea that a decision to forego or accept treatment should consider the benefits and the harms to the patient. So these are two of the principles of Catholic medical ethics that we use when we're looking at whether or not to accept a medical treatment, and also whether or not you want to refuse a medical treatment. So the principle of beneficence, the two things we look at are the degree of intrusiveness and discomfort involved in such measures. So what is the treatment? Is it a surgery? Is it you have to go on a ventilator? Is it chemotherapy? Do you have to have an organ transplant? And then we look at a decision should not result in net harm to the patient. So in this case, let me get my little pen here. I wish I had more time. Medical ethics is fascinating. My mom was a nurse, so and I've been in the hospital so much myself. Okay, so we have to look at the harm versus the benefit for the patient, and or I guess it would be like this, huh? It has to have greater benefit than harm. So another principle of Catholic medical ethics is called the principle of double effect. So this is, one may perform a good action even if it is foreseen that a bad effect will arise only if, one, the action itself must be good. The only thing that one can intend, and this is the key thing, is the good act, not the foreseen but unintended bad effect. The good effect cannot arise from the bad effect, Otherwise, one would do evil to achieve good. So again, you can't even use an evil means to achieve a good effect. And then finally, the unintended but foreseen bad effect cannot be disproportionate to the good performed. So again, the good has to outweigh the bad in this case. So when we're looking at different questions of medical ethics, one of the important things to remember is they always have to go on a case-by-case basis, because every patient's going to have different circumstances. In medical ethics, the circumstances are extremely important. And remember, circumstance can't make an evil action good, but it does change the degree to which an action is good or bad. And so, especially like if you're at a Catholic hospital, they have ethicists on staff. So if they have to make a decision about withdrawing, like taking a person off a ventilator or something like that, they have ethicists who can help you with that. And also, just for your reference, I had some case studies in here, but let me show you. I wanted to show you something. Make sure I showed it to you. Hang on. So I'll talk about that in a second. Hang on. Okay, hang on. I had some little case studies we could look at. Oh, this is what I wanted to show you. Okay, so this picture here is a link to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops website on like medical ethics. And then the NCBC, that's the National Catholic Bioethics Center. This, you might need this in the future. So, you know, heaven forbid you're in a situation where maybe you have a parent or a grandparent who's on a ventilator, and, you know, maybe one side of the family wants to take the person off the ventilator, the other side of the family doesn't, and you don't know what to do. If you contact the National Catholic Bioethics Center, they have ethicists on staff that will give you a Catholic perspective on making difficult medical decisions. So I just wanted to make you aware of that resource, because, you know, we're all going to get sick eventually. We're all going to be in the hospital eventually. So this is one of those ethical dilemmas that all of us will have to deal with at some point. So I wanted to show you that resource. So I'll go back. Okay, so one of the key questions in deciding about medical treatment is ordinary versus extraordinary means, or it's probably better to say disproportionate means. So the Catholic Church does not, some people, this is a common misconception. Like I've heard people say that if you have like a do not resuscitate order and they take you to a Catholic hospital, the Catholic hospital won't listen to it, or crazy things like that. Or that the Catholic Church thinks, you know, you have to stay alive on a ventilator forever, even if you're suffering. That's not what the church teaches. You do need to continue ordinary means, which typically is food, water, oxygen, but you do not have to continue using extraordinary means if it's disproportionate. It's causing more harm than good. So, for example, a ventilator might be ordinary means for a 25-year-old COVID patient, but disproportionate for a 95-year-old COVID patient. So if you have two patients and only one ventilator and you have to make the choice, for someone who's 95, it might cause them more harm than good to actually even have them on the ventilator. So again, we have to look at it a case-by-case basis. Cancer treatment might be called for one patient, but not for another based on the type and severity of cancer. So usually cancer treatment would be something that we would consider ordinary means. But if you have a person who, you know, has had this cancer over and over again, and there's no, the prognosis isn't good, again, the principle of beneficence would be applied there. You might say, in that case, perhaps the person would you know, decline the treatment. And this is the one that's a really touchy one, nutrition and hydration. So if you have someone who's terminally ill, most people would say that nutrition and hydration is ordinary means. However, if you have someone who's terminally ill, sometimes giving, like someone who's like in a permanent vegetative state and their body is starting to die, if you give them nutrition and hydration at that point in the process, it actually causes them more pain because they can't process the nutrition and the hydration. So there are even cases in which withdrawing artificial like nutrition and hydration could be morally permissible. So that's why you have to look on it by a case-by-case basis. What time is it? Okay, we got like 10 minutes. So I had some case studies that I thought we could kind of look at. So in example number 1, we have a 72-year-old man who has COVID-19. He declines treatment using a ventilator so that a younger patient can use it. The man ended up dying of COVID-19 on March 15th. So what do you guys think? Do you think that given the Catholic principles of medical ethics, that would have been morally okay? Is there, oh, here we go. Hang on. Side video. What? Oh, there it is. Anybody? Thoughts? Anyone? No. Okay, well, this is all the examples I found are actually real cases. So this really did happen. He was an Italian priest, and they did not have enough ventilators for all the patients. And so he declined the ventilator so that a younger patient could receive it. And according to Catholic medical ethics, this was actually considered morally okay and actually heroic because a ventilator is considered to be extraordinary means. And given the man's age and the illness, his prognosis wasn't very good anyway. So we would consider, in this case, refusing this treatment to be morally illicit and actually heroic. Who knows, maybe someday he'll become a saint. So there's one case. The next one, let's see. So this is a tough one. A 39-year-old woman is pregnant with her 4th child. Doctors find a tumor in her uterus and urge her to have it removed, which would also obviously kill her child. She refuses the treatment and gives birth to a healthy girl. Due to complications, she dies days later. So what are any thoughts on this situation? Maybe put yourself in her shoes. What do you think you might do? It's a difficult thing to imagine. Anybody? Medical ethics. Anybody? Thoughts? No, you guys are getting tired. Well, this was also a true story. This is Saint, oh gosh, I've forgotten her name. It was in my notes. Is it Saint Chiara or is that the other girl? Oh no, Gianna Molla. I think this is Gianna Molla. So, oh wait, somebody knows her name. Oh, okay. Okay, see, so Ina says, I think it depends on whether or not she had to get a hysterectomy for the tumor to be removed or not. Yeah, she did. That could influence the decision a lot. Tristan says, I think a mother would do anything for her child, especially her 4th. It's a really sad situation. Yeah. Well, one of the arguments that's often cited for being pro-abortion is that what about the life of the mother? And so this is the real case of Gianna Molla. She was an Italian physician, and she chose not to have that. She would have had to have a hysterectomy. And if you don't know what a hysterectomy is, it's the removal of all of the female's reproductive organs, including the uterus. And the uterus is the womb where the baby grows inside the mom. And so if you take the uterus out, it kills the baby, because the baby needs the uterus to survive until about, the age of viability, in Great Britain, they actually changed their laws. It's now like 21 weeks, which is amazing. But in any case, Saint Gianna Molla refused the treatment, and she did give birth to a healthy girl, but she did, due to complications of the surgery afterward, die. And she was named a saint because of the heroic choice she made. I really do think that in designing the plan for the way human beings work, God made women the ones to have children, because I think he knows that we can handle it. I don't think men could, honestly. Like, if men had periods, we'd probably have, like, the week you were on your period, you could go on disability so you wouldn't have to go to work or something. But yeah, no, this is a true story. Now, according to the principle of double effect, if a woman finds herself in this situation, what if they have to do the hysterectomy because of a tumor? According to the principle of double effect, she could have chosen that option, because the intention is not to kill the child, and the procedure is to remove a tumor. But one of the foreseen but not intended consequences would be the death of the child. Had she chosen the other option, it actually would be considered morally illicit. Now, as Tristan said, most mothers, many mothers wouldn't choose that. I don't know if I should say most, but it's a really scary situation. So that was one case. We have like 5 minutes. Oh, here's a pregnancy one. This is another real case. It's called the Phoenix case. A 27-year-old woman is 11 weeks pregnant. I should look up how many weeks pregnant Gianna Molla was. And I maybe you guys don't know. I mean, I've had 2 babies, so 11 weeks, 12 weeks. 11 weeks is super early, right? And she has pregnancy-induced hypertension. Doctors recommend that she terminate the pregnancy to treat her condition. Otherwise, she will die. She reluctantly agrees to an abortion, and she survives while the baby dies. So what do you guys think? Anybody have any thoughts on this situation? This is a tricky one. And it's actually a really considered to be a very controversial case. Anybody? No. Okay. So the thing that makes this case particularly tricky, it compared with the other case we just looked at, is in the case of Gianna Molla, the procedure being done was to remove a tumor, and it just so happened that in order to do it, she had to have a full hysterectomy. In this case, it's a little bit tricky because the woman has pregnancy-induced hypertension, and because it's pregnancy-induced, the way to stop it is to deliver the baby. But in this case, if you deliver an 11-week-old baby, it can't survive outside the womb. So what became tricky in this case was whether or not the actual moral act was evil, because the moral act was essentially an abortion, which is considered an objective moral evil. And so there was a big debate in this. It's called the Phoenix case. This happened in Phoenix, Arizona, and it happened at a Catholic hospital. And the ethicist was a a religious sister, and she okayed it. But then the bishop decided that it was wrong, and he took away the Catholic status of the hospital. And so this is a hotly debated case. You have ethicists on both sides, some arguing that according to the principle of double effect, that it was morally licit, others arguing that it wasn't. Now, the thing that I would consider really important here is if you allow this pregnancy to continue, if mom dies, baby dies too. So I think that's a key question is, could they have given her any other alternative treatments for the pregnancy-induced hypertension that could have kept the baby in there longer and tried to, see if can we put her in the hospital? Can we manage this medically? Or, does the baby have to be born? And this is a close to my heart because I was actually in this situation, except for my daughter was 27 weeks. But my second daughter was born at 27 weeks. She weighed 2 pounds, 7 ounces, because this is the precise situation I was in. So I showed you these resources because oh yeah, go ahead, Isabel.
I think a big difference between these cases though is how with the first one, she would have not been able to have children anymore. And it sounds like with the second situation, she would have still be able to have children. And so I think with the first case, she was willing to risk that because it would have been her last child if she lived. While the other lady, like this, I don't know, it just sounds like there's still some differences because I don't know, because like she would still be able to have children after, like if she choosing to abort because she was in pain and everything. It was also the difference is that it sounded like for the first case, she had a tumor, but it wasn't really causing her a lot of pain. So she was still able to continue the pregnancy. While with the second case, she was in pain in the middle of her pregnancy. So she would have to have gone months on with this.
Yeah, that's good. It's always good to really completely understand the situation. And when we look at that principle of beneficence, having a total hysterectomy is a big difference from the other case, because again, she would never be able to have any more children. Whereas the surgery if you have pregnancy-induced hypertension and you deliver the baby early, you could have other kids in the future. It doesn't actually, depending on the situation, you'd probably be able to have more kids after that. Yeah, that's important to consider all the issues. Well, it's time to go. Please do remember to do that homework assignment. And yeah, have a good weekend. I'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you.